Greetings Graviteam Tactics players to my introduction to the South African Bush War playing as the SADF using the DLC Leopards Leap. I will be playing using the default hard settings. If playing this DLC sparks an interest in the history of this conflict, I can recommend Leopold Scholt's The SADF and Kuwana Vale. Quite a good read, not too difficult, and will give you a good broad background of the situation. The main characters in the conflict were FAPLA, MPLA and UNITA, who posed as various communist factions in an effort to get resources from their benefactors, and with UNITA even being Western so-called at one stage in an effort to get resources, as they all fought over the resources of Angola, which really was their primary goal, rather than the ideological conflict they tried to sell. The 32nd Battalion was a very interesting unit of the SADF, and they were collectively known as the Buffalo Soldiers, light infantry rather than how they are depicted in game, but a very interesting story there. Because of Western sanctions, the South Africans had to develop their own defence industry, and one of the interesting family of vehicles they produced was the Ratel. And displayed here is the Ratel 90, which is the primary infantry support vehicle in Leopards Leap. They did have the Elephants later on, but wasn't in the Leopards Leap campaign. They also had the Ratel 20 with a 20mm cannon and Ratel command vehicle. A very interesting vehicle was the Ratel ZT3, which was an experimental vehicle at the time. They introduced 3, but only 1 was serviceable. But it proved to be very effective, but was still produced in very limited numbers. Also under the support vehicles is the Ratel 60 Mark III and the Ratel 81. The South Africans also produced some interesting armoured personnel carriers, including the movie star good looks of the Buffalo APC Mark I and its bigger brother, the Caspia APC Mark II. So certainly purposeful looking vehicles, quite tall, to combat anti-personnel mines, which went against the thinking of higher the vehicle, the higher the silhouette, of course. Let's have a look at the two heavyweights in the contest, the Ratel 90 versus the T55A Mod 1963. You can see there with the turret armour of the T55 is 200 for the front, 160 for the sides, 65 for the rear and 30 for the top, so quite good armour there. Now if we compare these two vehicles, you can see on the left hand side there the 90mm GT2 main gun of the Ratel 90 with heat M630 is good out to 1500 metres against armour of, let's say, 255, 260mm. Now notice the yellow line indicates 160mm, which is the side armour of the T55. If that shell hits that armour at 45 degrees, it has an equivalence of, say, 235 to 240mm. So the orange line is the front armour, which is 200 at 0 degrees. So depending on the angle of incidence, that could be far more effective even than the M630 heat at 260. So you look down the bottom, the 65 rear at 45 degrees is equivalent to about 90. Now if we have a look at the right hand chart, you may quickly notice that the frontal armour of the Ratel is only 20mm. So all of the T55 ammunition can penetrate the Ratel to 1500 metres with ease, and in fact the heat ammunition can penetrate up to 340 millimeters of armour. So we need to be very careful on how we use the Ratel 90 against the T55. In any slugfest, the T55 is going to win. So in fact you have to use the Ratel 90 more like a World War II self-propelled gun, say, than a main battle tank, which I think is easy to do given it does look like the main defence against the T55. So let's now move on to the first scenario. Our historical background is there in the top right, and the scenario information is below that. If you want to read the historical background, press pause now. Otherwise, 10 September 1987, 0600, turn 1. So basically the Fapler forces have put a pontoon bridge across the River Lomba and aim to continue their offensive towards the southeast of the map towards Mavinga. In their way, SADF troops consisting of two companies of 101 Southwest Africa Task Force, one company, and AT Squadron from 32 Battalion defend the south bank with the goal of preventing the crossing of the river by Angolan troops. Some of the regular viewers will know this is my second attempt after my disaster on the River Lomba. So this time I decided a more conventional advance in the first turn, in having 2 units forward and 1 in the rear. It's more of a defensive formation than attacking. I think with the South Africans you maybe have to be a little bit more defensive given that you are the outnumbered force. Not too keen on not having combat in the first turn, but there you go, we go straight through to turn 2. Here is the briefing for turn 2. The width of the floodplain of the River Lomba reached 3 kilometres. At such a range, the 90mm guns of the Ratel 90s were ineffective against the T55 Fapler tanks that were in the forefront of the offensive. With the South Africans, you're always trying to find an area where you have local superiority, given that the Angolans have the superior in size force. So I decided to go all in against the Angolan force here on the eastern flank. So off go my infantry from my central group. I'll explain that more later on. I was trying to get these guys to a bunch of bush just to the right there, thinking that'd be a good observation area. Ended up being right in the middle of a heap of traffic. So you can see there my buff being shot at. So total confusion at the start of the scenario, which is fairly usual in Graviteam, given that the enemy units beam in and they can all of a sudden appear 50 metres away from your troops. Like this T55 basically drove straight through the company of infantry. If I have one criticism about Graviteam, it's the way this starts. This beaming in of the enemy formation, but for whatever reason it is what it is. And quite conveniently for us, the T55 gets toasted. one of the crew decides to leg it. So my Ratel 90s actually managed to survive longer than the opening stanza, and we're in a very nice position here. You might see they were just hull down to the bad guys, and we're doing some pretty good work from where they were. So this is the view from my central section out to the main body of the Angolans, which we were able to neutralise fairly early and at least get the battle into some semblance of balance. Which is your first goal, I think, when playing Graviteam. So this whole section here we're looking at is what I call the central section. You can see in the top right of the map, that's the southern section where the Ratel 90s are and some other mounted infantry. And behind this formation is the northern section, which is along the Lomba River. You can get a fair feel for how you're going by your rate of fire, and I think you can probably tell by the noise and everything that at this stage we're at least matching the Angolans. So it's what I call balance. Of course my guys there in the southern section are doing pretty well, thanks to my Ratels surviving. This was one of the rare occasions I've had playing the South Africans that I've had a chance to move the Ratel 90s around a little bit more tactically. Really, they were in a perfect position right now. I should have been a bit more patient, as you'll see later on, and just sat here and by the amount of fire I could put in that area straight in front, dominate that area and prevent the Angolans from advancing through that valley. Remembering that we are supposed to be on the defence at this stage. I think as players it's a major difference for us to move from the offence to the defence. It's a totally different mindset, and I think being players we tend to be more aggressive and impatient. This poor chap in the buffle, he bought it, so the buffle is going on its own merry way. This is something I like doing during a game, is jumping over to the enemy side and just getting a feel for the incoming fire versus the outgoing. Also, I saw those BTRs there in the central area, and our Ratel 90s are at the top left there, so I thought, well, that'll give me a chance to move the Ratel 90s across, which I subsequently do here, in an effort to tidy up those BTRs in the middle. Meanwhile, this is that central, no, this is the northern group. This buffalo had copped it. Yeah, this is the northern group here. We're just starting to warm up here. They'd had a reasonably quiet battle so far. Of course, if you keep following this along, you'll get to the bridge, which is a key point. So this is the northern group here in the foreground. That's the central group. So keep an eye on the amount of blue dots and things. You get an idea that the density of those blue dots diminishes over time. Now, as I mentioned, the main body is in the middle, top middle of screen there. There was another large section of Angolans to the top right hand side of where we are at the moment. At this stage I was feeling a little bit confident that we might be able to take on the top right hand group as well. I had a feeling that we were going to put this group in front of us out of commission. And I was hoping we would have the numbers to push on. As you can see, all these guys are really in a killing ground. In fact, the group's even further around to the right than what I showed there. I was always conscious with the Ratel 90s that it's easy to overextend them, so every now and again if I thought the Angolans were hitting their range, I'd retreat them. As you can see, some artillery's coming in there, so they're starting to get the range of where the Ratel 90s were. So I thought the good idea there would have been to reverse them out. Especially as I knew further back towards where the camera is, we possibly had that very minor hull down. So you can see that group in the top middle of the screen now. That's what I call the far right group of the Angolans. They had some nasty anti-aircraft guns which really can damage the Ratels. I got a taste of those later with getting a bit excited about what I could achieve. I'm always keen to kill the other side's artillery pieces. You can see those yellow gun symbols there towards the rear. If you can, machine guns are really good against them, and mortars, which we don't have, or other artillery of course, which we don't have at the moment. In the actual campaign, the South Africans had very good artillery. So even in this southern group which we're looking at, it's interesting to note the density of icons. You'll notice that I start thinning out, and that gives you the idea that, hey, we're losing momentum. On hard, I find I generally can manage a draw, and I sort of find that more interesting. I think on normal I can usually, in this situation, win or get a good result, I'll put it that way. But in hard it is a lot more difficult because they just have so many options. But that's what makes it interesting. as a gamer, you know, you want something which is a bit of a challenge and is interesting. Winning or losing, you know, doesn't really matter. It's nice to win though, for a change. But I'll take a draw at this stage as well. While we're following this Ratel 90, it sort of sprung to my mind that really you have to use the Ratel 90s and the Chieftains in a sort of similar way. You have to use them with kid gloves a bit. Try and protect them and don't get too aggressive with them, because as soon as you overstep the mark, you'll find by some of them self-immolating. So if you haven't tried a modern campaign with the Graviteam tactics, you know, either this South African Bush War or Operation Victory, Iran-Iraq War, it really is different and worth a look. This group, which I describe as being to the far right, were like Greek sirens, just luring me forward towards them. Of course, the closer I got to them, the more in range I was. And also, I think I was probably losing my terrain advantage that I had over, say, the main body. So I did end up getting in range of some of those anti-aircraft guns, which were quite nasty. Just didn't quite have the weight. So here is a Ratel 60. I understand their grenade launchers was there. Had 45 rounds, which would have been very handy against infantry, which is why I brought them up here. But you see there's quite a lot of vehicles down there as well, plus these anti-tank guns. So that's why I brought them up. I was hoping they might be able to use them with the grenades. So at this stage, that northern group I've been mentioning got themselves organised and started mounting some sort of a counter-attack. And then when I looked at the amount of well, my units flashing in panic mode and the density I mentioned, you can sort of tell that momentum was slowly ebbing away from my hands. So my dreams of a counter-offensive were being dashed. Note here how the Angolan rate of fire seems to be increasing. wasn't long after this sequence here, you can see the advance, that I terminated my advance and started withdrawing my lead elements to bring them back more into line with the main body of the southern group. So at this stage it was a big scatter to try and come back and maintain density of units, so I had that rate of fire thing to try and hold them back. But certainly looking around the battlefield I could see that there was significant holes in my line. The density of troops just was vaporizing, so I accepted the AI's generous offer of a truce. You can see here that lead platoon that I highlighted at the start of the video has been totally wiped out in its advance towards those reeds here in the middle. The guys in the northern group were holding their own. But it seemed pretty obvious at this stage that we weren't going to achieve anything further. Thought I may have achieved a draw in this, maybe a minor loss, I'm not sure. I need to figure out a way to not lose so many troops, perhaps using the Control G concealed, although the troops do go to ground themselves when under fire, and maybe withdrawing panicking troops a little earlier than what I do. So I was hoping for a draw, not sure, maybe a loss I guess. Seems I'm down 150 and the achievements don't look too thick on the ground. Still, it was an interesting little battle, and I hope you enjoyed following it along with me. So we'll see how we go next time. So thanks for watching, hope it was a bit of fun, and enjoy your gaming. Cheers.